The residents of the besieged enclave of Gaza faced a night of death and destruction as Israeli warplanes launched a series of airstrikes. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Saturday vowed to reduce Gaza to rubble after Hamas's unprecedented attack. Michael Appel has this report.
The extent of the devastation in Gaza is difficult to comprehend. Israel is now at war with Hamas, and the people of Gaza are bearing the brunt of that. This man lost his entire family when his house was destroyed. He's not alone in his grief. The morgue at the Shifa hospital in Gaza is at capacity. Among the dead, 5 children, all from the same family. Amid the fighting, the chaos and the destruction, families prepare to bury their loved ones.
They probably target civilians more than politicians to try and pressure us into giving up. But we're not going to give up, and we are here to stay. This is our land, and we won't abandon it.
Entire apartment buildings, homes, schools, and even a mosque weren't spared in the airstrikes.
What happened to us is complete destruction. We are the al-Bawab family, and there were 150 people in this building. All of my family's homes have been destroyed.
The heaviest fighting in decades has killed hundreds and wounded several thousand Palestinians. Seven people were in this house when it was hit by Israeli forces. 4 are dead. Israel has cut off electricity, fuel and water supplies to one of the most densely populated territories in the world. Hospitals are overwhelmed and unable to function without basic services. Ordinary Gazans can do little but continue to endure one of the world's worst humanitarian situations, the misery amplified by war. Michael Appel, Al Jazeera.
Let's bring you up to speed now with the latest developments. More than 700 people have been killed in Israel since Hamas launched that surprise attack on Saturday. The high death toll undermines the perception that Israel is always protected with its ironclad security. Let's take a look at how the human cost of this latest war compares to others. In the 2008 war on Gaza, about 1,400 Palestinians and 13 Israelis died before a ceasefire was reached. In 2014, more than 2,000 Palestinians were killed in Gaza. 73 Israelis died, most of them members of the armed forces. And 2 years ago, another flare-up resulted in 250 Palestinians killed in Gaza. 13 people lost their lives inside Israel. Let's bring in our guest now, Mouin Rabbani, who is a non-resident fellow at the Centre for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies in Doha. He joins us from Yerevan in Armenia. Thanks so much, Mouin, for being on the program. Certainly plenty of developments this evening, which I want to get your thoughts on. The first one is the reaction by the US. We have heard from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who has described this as an abhorrent terrorist attack. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is effectively functioning as a spokesperson for the Israeli Ministry of Defense, sees this entire issue exclusively from Israel's point of view, exclusively from the point of view of Israel's interests and Israel's objectives. And to him, Palestinians are just irrelevant human scum that need to be removed so that Israel can continue settling and annexing the occupied territories. And this is of a piece with the general Western reaction, where the condemnation has been exclusively against Palestinian organizations, where they have been repeatedly emphasizing what they term Israel's right to self-defense, knowing full well that Israel interprets support for its right to self-defense as a license to engage in the kinds of horrific, bombings and slaughter that we've been seeing in Gaza this evening, and acting as if this entire crisis emerged out of a vacuum and did not have a context of 17 years of blockade, of virtually daily pogroms in West Bank villages, of Israeli incursions into the al-Aqsa mosque complex, of more than half a century of occupation. I could go on, but I think you get the point.
No, I do. And I guess what I want to explain to our audience is that this is not as simple as hero and villain, right or wrong, is it? It's a lot more complex than that. What do you hope that the audience takes away from that statement? What do you hope that they learn from the idea that it's not just black and white in this case?
Well, if your question is whether any party has a monopoly on morality, of course not. That's never been the case and never will be the case in any armed conflict. But we should have a proper understanding of the broader context in which this crisis, which is only the latest of multiple crises that have emerged in recent decades, emerged. And that is that this is a conflict between the occupier and the occupied, between the most powerful nuclear-armed military in the region and an effectively virtually defenseless occupied people who have been, former British Prime Minister David Cameron described the Gaza Strip as the world's largest open-air prison, and he was a staunch supporter of Israel. The population of Gaza Strip has been under siege for decades and under occupation for more than half a century, and without understanding this conflict, it makes little sense to try to understand what is happening now. And when people have only condemnation for one party, and that party happens to be the victim in the larger scheme of things, it's not something that deserves to be taken in any way seriously and can be dismissed out of hand from my point of view.
How confident are you that there will be any sort of support once the Security Council convenes? They're expected to hold an emergency meeting in about half an hour's time, Mouin. Do you think anything will come of that? Do you think there'll be any de-escalation?
No, of course not. The general pattern in these things is, well, first of all, as you know, the United States is a permanent member of the Security Council, and therefore criticism of Israel by that body is essentially taboo because it will be vetoed by the United States. The general pattern is that the United States, at the beginning of such crises, will oppose any calls for a ceasefire or a de-escalation in order to give Israel more time to achieve its objectives. Then a certain point is reached where Israel is no longer able to achieve its objectives and becomes in some kind of crisis. And then all of a sudden, Washington begins calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities to pull Israel's coals out of the fire. And I fully expect the same pattern to be followed on this occasion.
Well, we really appreciate your insights and breaking it all down for us in what is a very complex issue. Mouin Rabbani, a non-resident fellow at the Centre for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies in Doha.